I think I'm live. It is still, I'm alive, very much so. It is still July the 12th, 2023, and I decided to read another chapter of Life as Carola. I'm going to upload it on my BitChute, and you can read the description. She is the illegitimate daughter of Lord Griffin. She was banished as a child with her mother. Her mother dies. Anyway, we're in chapter 17 now, and Carola has joined a convent, the APRIKOT. The new abbess was like a miasma, a blight, a pestilence that poisoned our days. She seemed to delight in finding new ways to make us unhappy, and she tried to make us feel ourselves the children of sin. We were no longer allowed to speak to each other except to ask for necessities. When I was first punished for breaking this rule, I asked her, if God meant man to be dumb, why did he not leave us without the art of words, as he left the animals? To this question, my only answer was an order to spend my next 3 nights on my knees in the chapel, and my days locked in my cell. To her, pleasure, even the most innocent, was a sin, and in her ears laughter was a hellish carillon. We were forbidden to run, but we must walk soberly with lowered eyes, and I've heard a girl punished for watching a butterfly or pausing in her work to listen to a thrush. Our food had always been simple, but it had been plentiful. Now there was never enough of it to satisfy our hunger. Though the bread was still baked twice a week, it was stored away until it was stale or mouldy before it was given to us. Even in the coldest weather, the broth was never hot. It had a clammy warmth to it, under the congealed fat that clung to the side of the bowl. It was easier for me than most of the others, for they never had to learn what it felt like to go hungry. The nun who shared our meals in the refectory was fat and kindly, and I knew she was often ashamed to ladle out such meagre portions. But she was too used to the habit of obedience to protest. We were told that God watched us to record our sins, and I think many of the novices thought of him as an omniscient eye that stared unwinkingly at them to count their little transgressions of the code laid down for them. At first I tried to foster a spirit of rebellion in the others, but they were afraid to listen, and I think most of them began to look on me as a temptation placed amongst them by Satan. I became very scornful of their slavish obedience and took a mischievous pleasure in plucking at their fears. It had been a custom, when the fruit was in season, for the novices to be given a share of it, but now it was all exchanged for bread to give to the poor. Even the refectory garden had been changed. The grass paths between the plots had been cut away, and the ground was divided with the orderly precision of a cemetery. Every herb were not allowed to share their bed with each other. Even herbs were not allowed to share their bed with each other. But bees defeated this virginal device and took lovers' messages from hellebore to madder, century to balm. Many varieties of fruit were crucified on the high walls at this season. The apricots were ripe, so golden with their sweetness that it seemed they must keep their sunny warmth all through the night and glow in the darkness. One of the novices, I never liked her. She was fat and stupid, ate one of them. She had always been hungry, even when our meals had been good, and I think she found the fruit in her mouth before she realized what she was doing. She was seen by the nun in charge, for now we worked under constant supervision, and was kept without food for 2 days, and then whipped for stealing. When she came back to us, she was always weeping and muttering her prayers, and at last I got her to tell me what was the matter. I'm so wicked and I've sinned like Eve. Eve stole an apple and God was so angry that He cursed all the women because she had been a thief. He did that to Eve for an apple. He's sure to do something terrible to me for stealing an apricot. The abbess said that Eve was destroyed by the serpent of evil knowledge, and that the same serpent may destroy me. Don't be a fool, Octavia. Don't you believe that the abbess tells you? She's a wicked and ignorant woman. Her mouth fell open and she crossed herself. Carola, that's hearsay and blasphemy, and I finished the sentence for her. Common sense. She crossed herself again twice, as to make sure. You mustn't talk to me anymore, Carola, as it's wicked to try to destroy people's faith. I laughed at her. Never mind, Octavia. Octavia, even if you never speak to me again, I promise to warn you when I see the serpent coming for you. I expect they have different sized serpents for different people. There may be a huge silver serpent coiled up under the pumpkin leaves waiting for you when you have to go past them. Or there may be a little green one amongst the lettuces waiting to snap at your fingers. Or a very long, thin, brown one lying along the bough of a cherry tree waiting to drop down your neck. She burst into angry tears. You're wicked and hateful, and I think you're a witch. If I'm a witch, when you meet the snake, you had better say, what is your name? If it coils up on the path and looks at you, as if I am looking at you, you'll know it was me. I often change myself into a snake when I'm by myself at night, so that I can wriggle out through the grating and go for walks. I shouldn't tell anybody, or they may hear you for telling lies and think that you believe in sorcery. Oh, I couldn't think of anything to say, so she couldn't think of anything to say, so she gathered up her clumsy skirt and ran away from me, down the path, as fast as if I were an overturned bee-skep. Bee-skep. I don't know what that means. Next chapter. Beatrice. One day, when we were reading the orchard, I found myself next to a new novice. If there had not been a stain like the lees of wine on her right cheek, she would have been beautiful. Her brown hair was glossy and her lips were full and red. A mouth made for love rather than austerity. She had the cell next to mine, and I knew she was unhappy, for in the night I often heard her sobbing. I had learned a way of talking as though I were mumbling in prayer, looking straight in front of me at my work, but this was the first time I had been near enough to whisper to her. Don't look at me, Sister Margarita is watching, but she can't hear us. What's your name? Mine is Carola. Beatrice, are you sure it's safe to talk? Safe enough. Anyway, Margarita is deaf. At least she pretends to be. Perhaps it's only because she's sorry for us. Do you hate being here? Are you unhappy too? I hate the abbess. It's quite different before she came. Can you manage to get away? Can you manage to get taken away? Can't you manage to get taken away? Sorry. She tried to brush away a tear and left a smear of earth on her cheek. My parents will never allow it. My mother hates me. She's ashamed of this terrible birthmark on my face. I was never allowed to go out with my sisters because she said it would spoil their chance of a rich suitor. I didn't mind really, at least not very much, but then I fell in love with someone whom my father said would be an unfavourable alliance, and said I should marry him however much they forbade. And I said I should marry him however much they forbade it. And the next day they brought me here. Oh, I'm so miserable. She was so moved that she forgot her caution, but Margarita was noddingly sleepy and did not notice us. His name is Fernando. I met him when he came up to paint a fresco for the loggia in the house we go to in the hot weather. I had been sent there with my old nurse. I suppose Father forgot Fernando would be there. Fernando is so handsome. He has a little golden beard and he's much taller than I. And he writes poems, almost as well as he paints. He loved me so much, he did not even mind my scar. I used to try and keep that side of my face turned away from him in case it hurt him to see it, and he said, "If one petal of a rose is crushed, it only smells the sweeter." So I wasn't ashamed of it anymore. I thought I was going to marry him. I knew he was poor and not of a noble family, but I thought my mother would be glad to see me married and away from her. I didn't think she would have stopped us, but my father is very proud, and he said that Fernando should have been flogged for his presumption. And I was locked in my room. And we were not even allowed to say goodbye. And my sister scolded me for trying to bring disgrace to the family. I prayed to die, but God wouldn't listen. He doesn't want me. No one wants me, except Fernando, and I'll never see him again. Poor Beatrice, but don't despair. They may change their minds. They will never change. They've told everyone that I have always had a vocation. I shall live here all my life. If I'm very unlucky, I may live to a great age, and then I'll be all alone, for even the memory of Fernando will have gone. Less than a month later, among the poor that came to have their wounds tended, I saw a boy of about 14, who, in spite of the rags in which he was dressed, looked as though he had known hunger only in the guise of a good appetite. He stared at Beatrice, and she recognized him, for she flushed and looked quickly away. I went up to the boy and asked what I could do to help him. He began to tell me how he suffered great agony in his stomach, as if a viper and a mother viper with a nest of young ones at that had taken up her lodgings in my bowls. He clutched his stomach and groaned, mostly realistically, but I felt sure that it was only a pretense to gain entry to the convent, so I whispered to him, "You're a fine actor. I hope you're as good a messenger. You have a message, haven't you, for Beatrice? You can give it to me, I'm her friend." And as he still seemed uncertain whether to trust me, I said, "Is it from Fernando?" He nodded, and still mumbling, miming the sufferer, he said, "Fernando has at last found where they put her. He believes that she loves him and is there against her will. Is this true? Do you know her heart?" I whispered that she dearly loved Fernando. He went on, "Fernando will wait outside the wall at any point you tell him, and at any time. He has 2 fast horses and man's clothes for her to wear. They will ride to the next town where a priest will be ready to marry them." I said, "Listen carefully. Tell him to wait at the south gate corner of the convent wall from dusk until midnight, 3 days from now. If she does not come, he must wait for her every night until I can arrange her escape. Go now. Someone may be watching us." I did not have a chance to talk to Beatrice until late that afternoon, whilst we were raking rotten leaves and carrying them in flat rush baskets to the corner of the garden where the pumpkins grew. Beatrice was eager, yet fearful. She had been brought up to be a piece of mosaic in the pattern of her family, and had never had to make an important decision for herself. I think she had made such a stark picture of a lonely future in which she would live on in her memories of Fernando, that she was startled to find that he was a reality. When I told her that he would wait for her at dusk, she said, "But Carola, we are locked in our cells. I couldn't get to him. I shall never be able to get to him from this hateful place." She began to sob, and I said, "Stop crying. You behave as though you needed a wet nurse instead of a lover. Do you think I'll have forgotten we are locked in at night? That's exactly why I have chosen that time. The sisters go to their cells to rest before the night office, and none of them will be in the garden." "But how will that help us if we're locked in?" "You will be in your cell, but I shall be in the chapel. I shall confess some little sin to Sister Caterina. I shall have to choose carefully and judge her humour, for it would be very annoying if I got solitary confinement when what I want is penitential prayer in the chapel. I must be careful not to tell anything that is true, or I shall be whipped for blasphemy. Don't worry, I shall be in the chapel the night after tomorrow. I have been punished for so many words since I have been here that now my tongue can judge phrase and punishment with as great a nicety as a wine taster can judge a vintage. I'm very stupid, said Beatrice, but I still can't see how it is going to help me. The nun who keeps the key of the cells, Margarita, the fat one that wheezes when she walks, doesn't go to her cell before the night office. She sits up in a chair in the refectory. I'm nearly sure she does this every night because I've had 3 nights penitential prayer this month, and she has always been there. She sleeps so heavily that one day when I crept in to try to find something to eat, I could have tweaked the hairs out of her beard before she hurt me. The keys have been on the table each time, for she unties her girdle when she wants to settle herself down and thinks nobody will see her. I get the keys, let you out of your cell and lock the door behind you. In the morning, when they find a locked door and an empty cell, they will probably believe a devil came to claim his own in the night. It's a pity we haven't got a little brimstone to burn there, so as to tend a touch of authority to the story. Would you like to be remembered in history as the bride of Lucifer? The next 2 days seemed interminably long. I was afraid that everyone who saw Beatrice would guess her secret, for she looked as if she were a bride already, but not a bride of Christ. I found that I had not overjudged my reading of Sister Caterina, and by the time the other novices were locked into their cells, I had been safely on my knees in the chapel for 2 hours. When all was quiet, I took off my sandals and crept along the passage to the door of the refectory. But though Margarita was nodding, she was not yet proclaiming her absence. At last, when I was almost despairing, I heard the first wheezes, and then the beat and rhythm of her snores. The keys clinked on the ring as I picked them up. She stirred, but only settled deeper in her chair. The day before, I had quietened the lock of Beatrice's cell with a feather dipped in oil, but it still creaked when I turned it. The passage was very dark, and we had to feel our way along by the wall. There was a small breeze, and the leaves rustled furtively in the shadows. Water was dripping from the lip of a cistern, the drops clicking like the beads of a rosary. When we reached the orchard, we picked up the long skirts of our habits and ran as fast as we could over the rough furrows. I gave a low whistle, and a rope ladder was thrown over the wall. I kissed Beatrice and told her to hurry. The last I ever saw of her was silhouetted against the night sky before she jumped down into the arms of her lover. The excitement flickered out of me. I felt cold and alone, perhaps a little frightened. I picked 2 of the last pairs, like bronze among their lemon-coloured leaves, partly because I was hungry, partly as a small defiance. It was fortunate that I did so, for Margarita woke up when I was returning the keys, and she might not have believed me when I told her that I had been robbing the orchard if I had not been able to show her the pear I had not yet eaten. She must have been very sleepy, and though she was dreaming, for she neither punished me herself nor reported me to the abbess. I wondered if it had been laziness or kindness that prompted her indulgence, or whether deep down under her unnecessary flesh she remembered what it was like to be young. We were told that Beatrice had been taken ill in the night, and that her family had come to fetch her away. Did the nuns think she had been carried off by Satan or by a mortal lover? The next chapter is called The Ant. Beatrice was the only novice with whom I had felt even a shadow of friendship. I had tried to bridge the gap between myself and the others, but they remained hostile and suspicious. As CAROLA, I had never met such people before. There seemed to be no reality in them. They were like marionettes putting on a semblance of life, or actors' masks miming a bloodless vitality. I had never known women who had been brought up as they had been, though I had watched them in the distance, walking on the terraces of my father's castle, or riding in their carrying litters through the streets. I'd always thought that they would have had much to talk of, for their houses came from travellers from far countries, men of affairs, musicians, poets. So they would have plenty for their mind to feed on, and shelter in which such talents as they possessed might grow. But I found them so very stupid, small, spiteful, with wit not even tinsel bright. There was no mirror in the convent, and we were supposed to take no heed of our appearance except in the strict neatness of our habits. When Marilla broke out in boils, not bad enough for the nuns to count her ill, but very disfiguring, the others teased her about them until she wept with humiliation. They had not even the honest cruelty of the gutter urchin. They would wait until she was listening and then whisper slyly, "How beautiful is Orkana's skin, not a blemish on all its perfection. Is it not beautiful, Marilla?" Another girl would join in, "Oh, we must not ask Marilla's opinion. She is above the vanities of the flesh." Then they would giggle together like kitchen wenches, where there was no robustness in them, not even in their cruelty. Their words had not the keenness of a rapier, nor the coarse weight of a bludgeon, but they were like red-hot bodkins that never inflicted a fatal wound, but brought little sores that festered and spread and poisoned. I wondered how Lucia would have fared if she had come here with me. Lucia as she had been when I first knew her. Would she have been able to teach them her broad humanity, or would they have worn down her strength like a low fever? I think if she could have lived here for a week, she would have been less intolerant of men. She used to say, "Men are like children. Even when their beards are grey, they are still urchins brawling on the dung heap. Their love of pomp and bombast and glittering armies is only the love of dressing up that children have. Men seldom escape from their own childishness, and there will be no peace in the world until women rule." If she had been here under the old abbess, she might have thought our life the proof of her words, but under the new one, she would have seen how cruel can be the rule of women. I remembered my vision in the mountains and knew that away from earth, my long past waited for me. All the people I had been were near to me, were ready to enter into me. Yet, if I had courage, there would also be the time when I was a coward, for courage is the overcoming of cowardice. If I was generous, I had been miserly. If I was generous, I had been miserly, or so it seemed. If I was kind, I had once been cruel. If I had sympathy, I had been callous. With Petruchia and my mother, even with the old abbess, it was that part of me which would one day join in the ultimate conquering, which had shown it in my eyes. I had been able to withstand the hatred of Donna Isabella, terror, loneliness, the pox, for these had been open enemies, whose very presence had brought forth my courage to engage them in conflict. But man does not draw his sword to slay an ant, though the ant may sting his foot and make him lame. Since I had teased Octavia, the novices thought that I was a witch and shrank away from me. Even when I passed them in the cloister, they brushed against the wall lest the hem of my habit should touch theirs. When we were wheeling a strip of ground, we worked in a long row, but there was always a space left on either side of me. They used to stare at me and cross themselves, as if to ward off the evil eye. In a hundred little ways, they tormented me. I would find the plants in the plot I tended wrenched from their careful line and pushed carelessly into the earth, so they wilted. I found the water pot I carried on my shoulders cracked, so that the water trickled out and soaked my habit. They hid my hoe in the melon patch so that I could be punished for losing it. I had been foolish enough to tell something of my story to one of them when I first came to the convent, for she had seemed eager to be friendly. Now they whispered legends about the griffin, malicious, stupid. Sometimes at night I used to hear their words fluttering around my cell like blind white moths. The griffin is scarlet because it is drenched with blood. She danced naked at fairs. They showed her in a booth with the other monstrosities. They say that the griffin are vampires, murderers. She can change herself into a snake. A snake. When they find out what she is, they will burn her, burn her, burn her. Then Sophia's voice above the flames. Don't, don't, don't. I could feel my heart hard and tight within me, withered as a last year's walnut. My eyes felt hot and full with tears that were unshed because Octavia had the next cell and would never hear me if I cried. A new piece of land had been enclosed, and after the wall had been built, a door was cut from it into the orchard. The earth had never been tilled, and it was rank with briars and nettles. It became a favourite punishment to make novices clear so many spans with their bare hands, and only a wooden hoe to break the hard ground. One day I was working there alone among the nettles. They were like a forest of spears against me, and when I grasped them firmly, others brushed against me to sear my hands. Near me there was a little thorn bush, and under its shelter a patch of turf was smooth and green. I saw that a square of it had withered, where the sod had been cut out and then replaced. When I joined the growing turf, there was a cyclamen, half uprooted, its leaves turned back like the outstretched palms of a beggar in supplication. I carried it to a safe place and fetched water to refresh its roots. I had left my hoe lying on the turned patch, and when I came back to fetch it, I heard Octavia's voice say, "We've caught her." She had been lurking in a shadow of a wall buttress, and from behind a clump of brambles came her 3 friends. She turned to me triumphantly. "I told you she killed Beatrice with her filthy sorcery. I said I could prove it to you, for I knew that a witch had to return to the grave of her victim." She pointed at me. "Murderess!" I looked her coldly, steadily. "A pretty story, Octavia. I'm surprised that you had the intelligence to think of it." I pointed to the withered turf. "Is this her grave? You must have cut her up into very small pieces, for I could span it with my 2 hands. She came a step nearer to me. "It's no good trying to lie. We've caught you." The others chimed in. "Yes, we have. Octavia said it was Beatrice. Now we know it was." I picked up the hoe. "I will open her grave and see what it looks like." One of them gave a thin scream. "No, no." I said, "Are you too squeamish? You say I killed Beatrice and that you buried her, that I buried her. My thanks to you. Most murderers are not so fortunate in their friends as to have their crimes to apply concealed. I have no memory of this crime. Perhaps her body will serve to remind me of the circumstance." They stood huddled together as I turned over the turf. Under it, the earth had been disturbed. There were some withered flowers and then something wrapped in a torn shift. I pulled aside the wrappings and saw the decomposed body of a snake. I shook my head in mock pity. Poor Beatrice! I should never have recognized her as the girl. I knew not only a snake, but a dead snake. How very unfortunate for her. Then my voice hardened. "Now it is my turn to question. You buried Beatrice and I dig up a snake? What have you done with her? You say I killed her. You must have seen her dead. Where is she?" The others shrank back and pushed Octavia forward as their spokesman. She was flushed with excitement as she pointed at the dead snake. "You know that's Beatrice. We saw you whispering to her, just like you tried to whisper to me. But poor Beatrice was foolish and listened to you. You taught her how to change herself into a snake and wiggle out through the gratings. Then you were frightened she was going to betray you, so you changed yourself back again and killed her as she was trying to get back into her cell. They burn witches. I shall be glad when you are burned." I realized when I'd started this fantasy, my teasing Octavia after she had eaten the apricot. I laughed. "Where did you find my poor friend?" "You know where we found her, under the window. The stone was still lying on her head when you had crushed it in. Where you had crushed it in. That was clever of you. Even we know that a witch must take a birthmark with her when she changes her form, and if you had not crushed her head, there would have been a red stain on the snake to prove your guilt. Until then I had only been sorrowful, scornful of their stupidity, but suddenly I felt anger pouring into me. Octavia must have seen my eyes change, for she shrank back. As I started towards her, the others fled down the path, uttering shrill little cries. But I knew they would not dare to tell the nuns that they had left their work without permission. I caught up Octavia and forced her to her knees. When she tried to scream, I gagged her with my girdle. In the struggle, her coif fell off, and grasping her by the hair, I dragged her towards the nettle bed. I flung her down amongst them, for she was flabby as a sack of meal. As she cringed at my feet, I said, "As I am a witch, you shall be my familiar, Octavia. Your first duty will be to pluck all those nettles with your bare hands." She was too terrified to disobey me. I sat down in the shade of the wall and watched her. Long before she finished, she was sobbing with pain, and her cheeks and forehead had been blistered where the nettles had lashed across her face. When the patch was cleared, I made her kneel down in front of me. Before I untied her gag, I turned over a stone and picked up a wood louse. "Look carefully at this wood louse, Octavia, for it was someone who betrayed me. I was feeling magnanimous at the time, so instead of destroying her, I turned her into this crawling dweller under stones. See, she is quite powerless. I have but to close my hand and she will be only a dirty snare." I flexed my fingers and pretended to consider, before saying, "I think I shall let her live today. But do not try to disobey me, Octavia. I think that within you there is the promise of an ant." That was rather enjoyable.